Yeah, and Seventh-day Adventists, a group of them, a group of doctors and nurses and other healthcare people, have created an institute called the Weimar Institute. It's in Weimar, California. It's in Northern California. And you've actually been there, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what is very interesting about this institute, at least to me, I've actually visited it myself, is they've taken the principles of the Adventist vegetarian / vegan / whole plant-based diet lifestyle, and they have done something that I find remarkable. And when I was there, I spoke to someone about what they've done with patients who have diabetes, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Do you want to talk a little bit about what they give as far as food in the beginning of the treatment to diabetic patients, and the effects of the food and the results of what they find as far as a cure?
Well, to be quite frank, there's actually two different, it depends on how severe the diabetes really is. If it's somebody who has blood sugars like 200 and something, or just ridiculously high uncontrolled blood sugar, even with insulin or whatever it is that they're taking, they will actually put them on a 72-hour fast. And what they'll do is they will give them nothing but a vegan parfait. It's like vegan yogurt over granola. And it's high fiber, it's simple, it doesn't give them a lot of, it doesn't give them a spike in blood sugar. They give it several times a day just so that they can, maintain their blood sugars at healthy levels. Otherwise they go so hypoglycemic that, But by the end of about 36 hours or so, their blood sugars are already normalizing. They have to take them off their blood sugar medication. Otherwise their blood sugars really will plummet, even though they haven't really changed much. If you're a regular diabetic, somebody who doesn't have these ridiculously uncontrolled blood sugars, what they'll do is they'll simply put you on a low protein, low fat, high carbohydrate, especially high fiber diet. So they'll feed you lots of beans, lots of vegetables. They'll feed you higher fiber fruits, stuff that, not like grapes or things like that, that'll be, or oranges and the like, that are going to spike your blood sugar. But things that are, strawberries or blackberries, these things that are higher in, I did not have the privilege of actually witnessing a lot of their food. I just saw some of it.
You haven't yet gone into the depth, perhaps the one who administered it, but you know a little bit, as do I. And I'll let you finish your thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, generally, and see, it's an 18-day program. So what they do is that, they do all your blood work and everything like that at the beginning of this 18-day program, and they either put you on the fast or just put you on this diet. And mind you, they don't just treat diabetics in this program. This is heart disease. This is high blood pressure. This is rheumatoid arthritis and some of these other, these other diseases that we think, are age-related or things that just, are genetic and you can't do anything about it. No. All these patients get put on the same kind of diet: low protein, low fat, high fiber, high carbohydrate, high complex carbohydrate, plant-based diets. There's not an ounce of animal products given to them. And it in many cases, it reduces their disease or, takes them off the medication. Some of them, many of them, it cures completely. It's amazing. And all they do, at least diet-wise, is just, put them on plants. There is exercise that's involved and some other hydrotherapy treatments and things like that they do involve. But as far as diet goes, all they do is simply put them on a plant-based, low-fat, low-protein, high-fiber diet.
So I wanted to rewind. Sorry, was that you said?
No, especially beans. They do a lot of beans there at Weimar, almost every meal.
Yeah, and beans, according to the Blue Zone books and studies, have said is the food that is most closely associated with longevity. And all beans are is high fiber, high protein, plant protein,
and high starch, yeah,
and a high starch complex carbohydrate. And so beans is sort of like that perfect food, I guess.
Yeah.
But it doesn't get any press, does it? Like
no,
if
not
we
really.
knew that, like if you think about, going, there's all these products, from pharmaceutical products to, crazy herbal products. If you just take this
I know.
supplement, you're going to be, and nothing against herbs, because there's a lot of good herbs, but, if you take this supplement, this, snake oil supplement, it's going to make you live long, and, advertising and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, this is it.
And yet, beans, if you really wanted the real, thing that made you live longer, we should be marketing beans to people, right? The magic bean, it's like Jack and the magic bean talk. I got these magic beans, but it's real. It's not. Yeah. It's not a fake thing.
Yeah, it's not anything. I know. And see, you're not the only one to notice this, and it's not just beans. But beans are perhaps one of the best examples. I remember hearing about a doctor who actually lectures in medical school, and he goes around and he brings out this new cure. It does all these different things. He calls it Isla Carb B, and he brings up all this stuff. It helps reduce the risk of cancer. It's full of, it's antioxidants. It's got antibiotic in there too, and it helps get rid of high blood pressure because it's got that. It just does all these different things. And these medical students are like, when is this coming out of the pharmacies? And he says, oh, it's not out of the pharmacy. Isla Carb B is simply an anagram for broccoli. And so he says, look, it's broccoli that can do all this. And he says, look, the issue is not the pharmaceuticals. That's not where the cure lies. I remember hearing another program, actually only last night, that said, look, a lot of the things that the big corporations and generally this just basically the big parts of the world, these things that they offer you, they'll make you feel better, but they won't make you get better. They're not really interested in you getting better, especially pharmaceutical companies. By and large, their business is not making people better. Their business is making people feel better, but not actually helping them to get better. Because if people actually got better, well, where would their profits be then, right?
Where would their
So it only makes sense. Yeah, it only makes sense for them business-wise to make you feel better, but not actually help you get better. The cure is not in these. I'm not saying that these things do not have their place or their role. There are times, if I get in a car accident, I'm not going to want to go and, eat some broccoli and some beans. That's different. It has their role. It has their place. But it's not something that will cure many of the diseases and afflictions that we deal with on a regular basis in America.
Right. And
accidents are not the top killer.
Right. So let's go back. Let's rewind, because I'm sure for our audience, this is probably a lot to handle. I mean, if you've been indoctrinated, that's what I think it is, indoctrination, brainwashed.
Absolutely.
Into an ideology of, the newest supplement, or, well, my doctor says meat is good for me. I need to have some animal protein.
Yeah.
Hearing all this stuff is going to sound magical, maybe even ridiculous to them, right?
Yeah. And I'm not surprised.
And so I want to rewind a little bit just to go on the evidence and the proof. So going back to Weimar, and I think this is critical, and we're just taking a diabetic patient. So a diabetic patient walks in at the Institute in Weimar. Worst case of diabetes imaginable. And for that first thing that they give them, it's a parfait, right?
Yes.
And what is the parfait made out of?
I'm not. All I know really is that it's some sort of vegan yogurt, likely soy-based or something like that. I'm not sure.
Okay, so
and then
more than likely,
granola.
More than likely, it's according, if we go back to the Book of Daniel, it's probably a pulse, a yogurt pulse almost. It has some, bean-based something, more than likely, and we'll probably, we can call them and ask them, what do you give them? We should have done research on that, but anyway, not your fault, mine, but we have a bean-based parfait with granola, right? And they fast on this, or first they fast for how many hours?
Well, no, this is the fast. You see, a lot of people think fasting is going without food completely, but that's not necessarily the case.
Okay.
These people, if they were, if diabetics were to be taken off of, food completely, their blood sugars would plummet so quickly, they would be in a dangerous state.
Yes.
So what they do is they give them this food that helps, it just gives them just enough to raise their blood sugar, but it also is, it's not just plant-based, it's high fiber, and it's,
yes.
It's low fat, and so it helps. Yeah, and so it helps regulate that blood sugar.
And how many hours are they fasting?
72.
So they're eating this food, no other food, for 72 hours.
Yes.
And what happens after that?
Then once they're done that, they start being introduced to just regular food again, except it's plant-based food.
Okay,
so they're eating beans, they're eating vegetables, they're eating fruits, they're eating oats and oatmeal and corn, grits, and whatever all.
So when you're at Weimar, the Adventist-based Weimar Institute, are they feeding you cottage cheese?
No.
Are they giving you skim milk?
Nope.
Are they giving you some salmon with some omega-3s?
No. The omega-3s, they actually don't focus so much on the omega-3s there on the diabetic or the heart disease patients because they're trying to get low fat. Any omega-3s that you get are from plants.
Do they give them fish oil? What do they give?
Nope.
When you're at Weimar, what are they giving the patients for omega-3? How do they get them to get that?
Flaxseed and walnuts. Actually, a lot of times what they do is they have, especially for people who are on their depression program, what they'll do is they'll put together this sort of a mixture of ground walnuts, ground flaxseed, and brown sugar, actually. And they'll sprinkle it on top of their oatmeal or something like that.
Oh, wait a minute. You're saying they give them brown sugar?
Yes.
How much brown sugar?
That was not much. I'm not sure.
A teaspoon mixed with walnuts and flaxseed?
And flaxseed, yeah, something like that. And so it's and of course flaxseed is high in fiber.
Well,
and they're
I thought
sprinkling it on
sugar was
oatmeal.
bad for us. Wasn't that the cause of diabetes?
No. The cause of diabetes, if anything, is fat.
From animals or from plants?
Both. Animals, it's worse, but even high plant fat is going to give you, you can have complete vegans who become diabetics because they eat a lot of coconut oil and a lot of other, things like that.
So if they're drinking down coconut oil every day and olive oil and guzzling olive oil, that's not good either because, even though it's vegan and plant-based, it's adulterated coming out of the...
Yeah, exactly. Just because it's vegan doesn't mean it's healthy. I mean, Coke is vegan. It's not an animal. There's not an ounce of animal product in Coke. That doesn't mean it's healthy.
So we can't get away with, drinking Coke every day, even though it's vegan, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but brown sugar is okay in small amounts. And helping people with depression.
Yeah.
As far as the mixture of the walnuts and the flaxseed and nuts, and so if I have salmon in front of me and I get, omega-3 from salmon, and I have flaxseed and walnuts mixed with, brown sugar is the Adventist way up at Weimar, right?
Yes.
Why can't I just eat the salmon? It's going to give me some omega-3s, right?
Well, first of all, there's the problem of mercury. If you eat fish, you are going to be exposed to mercury. It doesn't matter where you get it from. Even if you got fish from Crater Lake, which is the most isolated spot of water in the world, you're going to find, there's no inlet or outlet at Crater Lake. Even if you got fish from there, you would still be exposed to mercury because mercury is everywhere now at this point. You just can't get away from it. Secondly, omega-3 in fish and animal products is actually not as available biologically to your body as these omega-3s from plants. Why? Well, it's because it's not attached to a carbohydrate. You see, plant foods have carbohydrates. Animal foods do not, except for milk, which is actually kind of an animal processed plant food. The animal products do not have carbohydrates. Now, the reason is, carbohydrates are kind of the structure and the food of plants. And when we eat plants, we eat their food and we eat them, their structure. So, I'm getting back to the whole, oh dear. Oh yes. Basically what happens is the brain prefers carbohydrates over anything else, and there's something called the blood-brain barrier. And the carbohydrates will pass through there where the proteins will not. So if you have an omega-3 that's bound to a protein, like, say, an omega-3 from salmon or from another fish, it won't actually be as biologically available to your brain as an omega-3 from, say, flaxseed. On top of that, flaxseed has more omega-3s per serving anyway than any salmon. And, of course, salmon has that animal protein, which is linked to higher risk of cancer and heart disease and everything else. Plus, the mercury adding on to that, it just overall, the plant-based omega-3s is far better.
And the cholesterol and the fat from the fish, too, I imagine, might not be good.
Yes, that's true. Just because it's fish doesn't mean it's cholesterol-free. In fact, it's an animal product. It's not a plant. Any animal product will have cholesterol. Fish will have less, I grant you. That's because it's a smaller animal in general. Although if you want to, by the same token, shellfish are almost pure cholesterol.
Okay, so William, you're telling me that fish are not naturally producing omega-3? If so, where is it coming from? Where's it coming from?
It's coming from the plants they're eating, believe it or not. Usually it would be the green sea algae that they eat. So, of course, there would be like chlorella or these other green algae that they'll eat. That's where the omega-3s are coming from. It's not the fish that are producing them. You mentioned that. It's not. These fish aren't making them any more than we are. They are essential foods for those fish as well. The fish are actually consuming the omega-3s as well.
Okay, so what would be, if I got it from the fish, who got it from the plant, I guess maybe your argument might be, why not just get it from the plant directly? And then you can bypass mercury, cholesterol, fat, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, etc.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So, I think I see your argument. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about milk, because in our public school system, there are posters on walls in elementary schools and libraries where it basically says, got milk and do a body good and all that stuff, right?
Yep.
And it's advertised to children and to adults as a health food, that you need to drink milk from a cow, because without drinking milk, you won't have enough calcium. Your bones will get brittle, and just a lot of bad things will happen to you if you don't drink milk from a cow. It's basically, if you look at the government's food pyramid, and I think even Harvard has its own pyramid, which is slightly different than the government, more vegan, I'd say more plant-based, but still has animal products on it. But they both recommend, I think, a serving a day of milk, at least, or of dairy. So what would be wrong with, giving our children milk?
Okay.
Yeah.
And see, the thing is with that, while it is true that milk is a high source of calcium in the respect that it has high numbers of calcium, in reality, it's not actually that bioavailable. A glass of milk may have a certain amount of calcium. I don't remember the exact number, unfortunately. But there are plants out there that actually have more calcium than a glass of milk. The one that I can think of the most, actually the highest source of calcium that I know of in a food, and that would be the lamb's quarters. And the lamb's quarters is not a commonly eaten plant. It's actually kind of more eaten in, like, say, here. It's a garden weed, really, and so if you want to cultivate it, that's all well and good. It's not actually as bioavailable, though, because it has another chemical in there that kind of binds to calcium. The reason that the milk is not as good is because of the animal protein. You remember I mentioned the Eskimos, how they have this high consumption of calcium? They eat a lot of fish bones. Well, they have a high amount of animal protein in their diet, and they have, while they do have the high calcium intake, they also have the highest osteoporosis rates in the world. In fact, if you look at milk intake, countries with the most milk intake actually tend to have the highest osteoporosis rates. Now, that's not necessarily to say that milk is the only factor there, because there are medications and different things like that that also have a part to play. But in general, it's just not. Eating a higher animal protein diet or consuming milk is actually not your best bet. In fact, you don't even, at least, there are some countries that I know of, and, please don't take this as a recommendation. I'm just stating a fact that I know here. But there are places, say, in Africa, where there are lactating women who are consuming less than 500 milligrams of calcium a day. Now, mind you, that's less than a quarter. That's less than a quarter of the daily recommended intake here in the United States. They are lactating women in places like Africa. They don't eat a lot of animal protein. They don't eat a lot of animal products. They have some of the lowest they do not have osteoporosis. It's just not an issue down there. Why? It's not because they're eating high calcium. It's because they're eating low animal protein. And so and low protein in general. They're eating a lot of starches. They're eating a lot of fiber. They're doing all this other stuff. That's, they're mostly plant-based.
Yeah.
So So, I mean, the milk is not the cause.
And if you look at the composition of milk, I believe there's about 7 or 8 grams of protein from an 8-ounce glass of milk. And if you look at, say, an 8-ounce glass of human breast milk, there's about 1 gram of protein.
Yes.
So, one was, you could say, made for the baby cow to grow, right? The other one was made for the baby human to grow.
Yes.
And even as a baby human, you still don't need a lot of protein.
Yeah.
To grow.
Yeah, what's interesting, I remember a study that was done on medical students, believe it or not. And these medical students were asked, they were presented with a series of different milks. And they weren't told which one was which. And they were asked to recommend something for an infant. Right? Just to see, is this one good for, would this one be something that we would recommend for an infant? And they actually recommended cow's milk and other milks, like even rat milk, above human breast milk.
Okay.
They didn't know which one was which, but they took the higher protein ones over the lower protein one, even though human breast milk is specifically designed, really, it's specifically formulated to best feed the human body when it's growing in that infant stage. They recommended something other than human breast milk because they didn't think it had enough protein. And that really demonstrates kind of the indoctrination that we've had as far as how much protein we need and how important it is.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, is it a combination of not knowing and, the milk industry wants to sell a product, and so they can influence studies that are done.
Of course. Yeah, I'm sure that has a part to play in it. I wouldn't put it past anybody. We've seen that with the tobacco industry. They influenced studies, and they funded things that made tobacco look like it was good up until 57, that finally the United States said, you know what, it causes cancer. Sorry. We had saw something similar not too long ago. The meat industry has been just loading it down. We need animal protein. We need these proteins. Until the World Health Organization recently came out and said, look, red meats and all processed meats are, in fact, carcinogens. And, of course, we already knew that those things tended to, improve or decrease your ability to live longer.
It's grouped in the same class of carcinogens as cigarettes.
Yes.
So I think like a piece of bacon a day or something like that is equivalent to like 5 cigarettes a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was slightly wrong. I have to correct myself. I was slightly wrong on the protein amount in 1 cup of human breast milk. I looked it up, and it's actually 2.5 grams, just so. But anyway, it's still much lower.
It's much, much lower,
than cow protein.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's growing a different type of body.
Indeed.
And
a bigger one, for one thing.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, as far as I know, cows, after they're done drinking milk, the basis of their diet is, plants, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually it's grass, and it's actually not usually grain, not in the wild anyway. Usually it's grass, which is why grass-fed beef has become so popular these days. Natural meats and things like that are grass-fed.
So if bulls and cows and, really big apes aren't eating meat, where do they get all that big muscle and protein from? Where are they getting all their protein?
Yeah, it's funny you ask. Let me ask you a question. Which animal can run longer, a cheetah or an elephant? Do you know?
I think an elephant.
Yes, an elephant, though it cannot run as fast as a cheetah can run about 70 miles an hour. An elephant can run about 35 to 40 miles an hour, but a cheetah can only sustain that speed for short bursts. Right. An elephant can go for several days at that speed. Now, let me ask you this one. Which one's bigger, a cheetah or an elephant?
An elephant.
Which one? Yeah. Now, yeah, that's absolutely true. Now, the elephant is not a carnivore. The elephant is actually a vegetarian. You see, where it gets all that good, solid muscle that it gets from is its diet. It's actually got more energy. It's got more ability to push. It's got more just overall strength and capacity and power because it eats plants, not because it eats protein or any animal foods.
So
now,
yeah, go ahead.
I remember there's a story of a man who he was in his 60s, mind you, and he was this was out in California, and he back during some gold rush, during a gold rush period of time in the early 1900s. This wasn't the big gold rush, but it was still, they were doing some gold prospecting out here. And this guy he just lived out in the middle of nowhere. He was kind of a hermit, and he was hosting these several young men here. These men were, half his age, in their 30s, and they're eating all of this meat and such, and they're joking around about this guy because this guy's a vegetarian. He wasn't vegan vegetarian. He was just vegetarian, but he ate mostly plants, and he outpaced them all. He was charging up, trucking up ahead of the group, and everyone else was panting way behind, and they're like, how is he doing this? And he told them, well, look, you're eating the cow. I'm eating what made the cow big. I'm eating what the cow ate, So, yeah.
So, are you saying that we can get all our protein needs taken care of through a whole plant-based diet?
Absolutely.
So, what about all the recommendations from, the government's food pyramid to, even Harvard recommends eating some protein from animals and their food pyramid, and, are they all just wrong?
Well, if you look at even the USDA food pyramid, or whatever you want to call it, in their protein group, they group things such as nuts and beans as good sources of protein. Yeah. So actually, they do allow for a plant-based diet. And see, they tell you to eat a lot more protein. In fact, it's a whole long story that we don't really have time to get into at the moment. But it really is an interesting story of how the protein recommendations came around. Basically, there was a study done on this really high labor group called lumberjacks, and this guy followed them, this nutritionist followed them to see how much protein they had, they needed, and he calculated out a certain amount. The USDA took that and they doubled it, and that's what they recommend to this day. So now I'm not saying that necessarily, again, anybody who's listening, because this is not to replace, any talk with your doctor or dietitian or whoever. I'm not any, medical professional, and
could I ask you a question?
Quite frankly,
what are your credentials as far as health goes? What did you earn at Weimar?
Well, I'm a lifestyle coach. So what I do, I graduated from a program there that basically taught us all these different lifestyle principles, how to teach them to other people, and really implement them in our own lives. I myself, even though I was already a vegetarian before I went up to Weimar, I did improve a little bit just because I was exercising a lot. I was able to have just, and there was other things as well. It's not just diet. As I said, there's the other 7 principles as well, and those things were also improved a little bit while I was up there.
Great.
In my own life. But
but
I am a lifestyle coach.
A lifestyle coach. And what is a lifestyle coach exactly?
Well, I help people to make positive choices to, quite frankly, I help people to make positive choices to their lifestyles. That'd be things like, as we've been talking about, changing your diet. There's, of course, helping exercise. There's also drinking more water, just basically helping people to set goals and to reach them in the areas of lifestyle and health.
And people can earn a certificate from the Adventist Weimar Institute in Northern California, is that right?
Yes. Yes, it's a program that I went to myself.
And what is that program called?
Health. It's actually... It's typically for Adventists, but it's actually called Health, Evangelism, and Leadership Training for Him. That is for Christ. It is coming from a Christian background, of course.
Yeah.
But it is basically what it's about is helping people to learn about health and lifestyle and how it affects them, and treating the whole person, reaching the whole person. It's not just, it's not just the physical needs that need to be met. It's also the mental needs, the emotional needs, the spiritual needs, because we are spiritual beings. At least I believe so. And, if you look at all of the different blue zones, they're all spiritual. Now, they may share different belief systems. Some, as you mentioned, are Orthodox. Some are Catholic, Protestant Christians, Buddhists, and animists and things. But they're all spiritual. And there is that spiritual, that worship aspect that is part of our brain structure. And if we ignore that, I feel, we do have and not just I feel, but the studies seem to show and indicate that, yes, that is a part of it. But of course, we can disagree. But,
yeah, so
that's why I have relationship in there, or trusting God is one of them.
I think there's a difference between what I call the BBQ or the barbecue Christians, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ones who eat meat and cheese and milk and,
mm-hmm.
basically the type of Christians who don't have what the Seventh-day Adventists have, which is this health message, right? About, and I think it stems from the Garden of Eden. It was a whole plant-based diet, and the book of Daniel, where if you want to talk a little bit about that, you can, but it stems from this type of message, and this makes your movement quite different, at least from my point of view, than traditional Christian movements. Am I wrong?
No, we do have a lot of difference here.
And I think
when it comes to
that health message is what's leading to your longevity. Am I wrong?
Yes, it is. In fact, that health message is a pretty major part of Seventh-day Adventism, as you mentioned, as we've been talking about.
Yeah. So if we go back and we talk about sort of what led to the health message a little bit, and I'm okay with going over our hour if you are.
Yeah, just a little bit, yeah.
I think.
My phone is.
And if you need to plug it in or whatever, let me know. We can take a break or whatever. But Ellen G. White, can we talk a little bit about her and why she matters in the Adventist movement, and what was her health message, and how is that different than traditional Christianity?
Well, Ellen White she was a woman that lived from about the early 1800s all the way up to 1950. She was 87 years old when she died, even though she was perhaps one of the most sickly individuals that if you ever met her early on in life, you would not have thought she would have lived past 20. She was about 70 pounds at age 19, fainted constantly. She was a real mess and a wreck of a person. She ate a lot of meat. She herself testified to that. She ate a lot of meat, had a lot of unhealthy habits. And she became a member of the Millerite movement back in the 1830s, 1840s, which was a part of the Great Second Advent Awakening, which was it was a huge movement that took place throughout the United States. Now, when she'd become part of that, she eventually she helped, or she was one of the co-founders of the church known as Seventh-day Adventist Church, as you mentioned here. She is actually a prophetess, or at least is claimed to be a prophetess by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means not so much that she tells the future. A lot of people think that that's what a prophet does. But more than anything else, according to the tenets of the church, she is simply a messenger, somebody who communicates messages from God to his people. And one of those things that she talked about was this health message. If you go all the way back to the book of Genesis in the Bible, that would be Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2, we're actually told exactly what the original diet for human beings was. Genesis 1:29 says that I have given you every fruit tree that yields fruit, and every herb that yields seed to you, it shall be for food. It was a plant-based diet, 100% plant-based diet. That would be high starch, high carbohydrate, high complex carbohydrate specifically. And so you had this kind of this plant-based diet. And she said, well, you know what? We need to get back to that. This is important. Because it's not just about your physical needs. It's your spiritual needs that are important. But your physical needs are important, too. God cares about that. And, he's not just a God who looks at you on your spiritual life. He cares about your physical needs, too, and your physical well-being. He wants you to be healthy and happy.
Yeah, and there's a story about Daniel where he's confronted with the king's men, and the diet they were on was basically paleo, and he was on a pulse sort of vegan diet. Do you want to discuss that story a little bit for our listeners who might not be familiar with it? You still with us? Looks like we're having some technical difficulties with William on the line. I am going to talk a little bit about that diet while I try to get him back on the line. So, the book of Daniel talks a little bit about this struggle between, I believe it was Hezekiah. See, I'm not a Bible scholar.
I think I figured out what the problem was.
Oh, okay. You're back.
It was on my end.
Okay,
yes.
No problem. Well, anyway, I don't know if you heard my question, but can you tell a little bit about the story of Daniel? And
yes, I was going to get into that. So Daniel was this young man. He was actually in the days of King Jehoiakim. He was a young man. He was a member of the royal family, and he was taken captive to the country of Babylon, the kingdom of Babylon, Neo-Babylonia, if you're a history buff, and around the year 605 BC. Now, what happened with that? He was actually taken into captivity, and he was offered this food. He went to what a friend of mine calls Babylon University. Right? He went to this. He was to be educated in the schools and customs of Babylon. He was to be taught what Babylonian knowledge was. And mind you, this was the equivalent of the United States at this time. This was the technological and intellectual capital of the world.
And would you say their diet was a fairly meat-based diet?
Oh, it was heavily meat-based. In fact, it was referred to as delicacies. If you read in the book of Daniel, chapter 1, they're referred to as delicacies. And it's something that, delicacies, the wine that he drank. So he wasn't just, it wasn't just the meat and it was pastries, it was alcohol, it was these other things that just are overall. And yes, I am against alcohol.
So the
Bible is as well.
Are you saying the Babylonians had pastries?
Oh, yes. They had all sorts of different things. Even as far back as Egypt, they had pastries.
Interesting.
I mean, the stuff that, it was,
what were the
just different things.
What were the pastries made out of?
I'm not sure.
I'm guessing.
Little cakes and lots of, they did use honey and milk and different things in these pastries. I know that they were mostly like cakes and different things like that. They had the little flat cakes and things.
But it probably
rich
wasn't,
and spiced and things like that.
You're saying, though, it probably wasn't a vegan cake.
No, and it likely was not quite what we think of as a pastry today.
Okay.
But it was something that was similar to the concept that we have today.
But probably not, I'm guessing not a health food if we were to compare it. Okay, we're going to take a break right now and continue the interview in another part.